You're listening to The Film File right here on No Barriers Radio, the film show for film geeks by film geeks. Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Ford, and this is The Film File, the film show for film geeks by a solitary film geek. Yes, I'm flying solo this week. We have no Andy, my partner in crime, my co-host and my buddy. Those regular listeners will know that Andy is taking a break just to deal with, well, some health issues and looking after himself. I know you'll all join me in wishing him all the best and hope to have him back soon. So, of course, it's going to be a different kind of show. Well, you've just got me for the next hour or so. So you're not going to get any of the quick-fire, rapid banter, or as we call it, just another show. But I'm going to fill you in with bits and pieces that's been happening over the last week. So you may not know, or you may know, that the Film File goes out on various platforms. And we've now added another platform to our belt. So as the podcast, you can find us on Spotify, you can find us on iTunes, you can find us on Audible, in fact, any respected podcast platform. And now, adding to that, we are on Deal Radio. So we're already playing out on No Barriers Radio, but you can now find us on Deal Radio. So that opens up to some brand new listeners. And hello, Deal Radio. Thank you for joining us. As you know, every week we do our question of the week. Now, with Andy away, we're going to answer the question that we set last time when he gets back. But in the meantime, I've got a question for you, and it comes from this week's deep dive. I'm going to be looking at GoldenEye because it is its 30th anniversary, and boy, does that make me feel incredibly old, because I remember going to see it so clearly, that transition from Timothy Dalton into Pierce Brosnan. So my question for you this week on our social challenge is, what is your favourite Bond theme? And basically, in true Top of the Pops styles, and for those youngsters listening, Top of the Pops was a music programme. Ask your grandparents. I want you to name your top 5 Bond themes. This started from a conversation Andy and I were having about some of the Bond themes that just don't get a look in. And one of my favourites is Chris Cornell from Casino Royale, because I think it entered into a new phase and it set out its stall really well, kind of in the same way that GoldenEye did with Tina Turner. It was rocky, it was in your face, and yet it still sounded like a traditional Bond theme. And then some of the worst. I think Daniel Craig's run had some of the poorest Bond themes. The Sam Smith one for Spectre I thought was pretty poor. Adele's, well, she's got a great voice. It sounded like if you wanted to do a Bond theme, you throw that into ChatGPT and that's what you would get. I thought the Craig run was a bit disappointing. I did like the Jack White one for Quantum of Solace. You know what? I like Quantum of Solace despite what everybody else says. Anyway, you know what to do. Your top 5, please, of your favourite Bond themes. Whether that is the classic Connery period, anything from Roger Moore. Is it George Lazenby? Is it something from Pierce Brosnan? You let me know. And you do that by doing this.
Answer the question.
Head on over to social media channels, search for Film File UK. You can follow us on there. We'll post out the question during the week. You can email us directly with your answer, podcast@filmfile.uk. Or if you're on Spotify, underneath the show notes, there's a comments box. Pop your answer in there.
So let's talk about this week's show. I'll be reviewing Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which landed on Netflix this week. And does it reanimate the classic horror tale? We have not one, but 2 deep dives this week. A look back because it's 30 years since the release of GoldenEye, and we will dig deep into Pierce Brosnan's first outing as James Bond. And then, because Andy's away, let's go back into the legacy files and see what we thought of the whole Bond series, from Connery right through to Craig. But before that, I've got some news and I've got some views. For the news, we've got the latest box office, and dominating the box office right here in the UK and in the US with a Friday take of $15 million is Predator Badlands. Now, I've not seen it yet. I know Andy's not seen it yet, but we will be reviewing it on next week's show when we get to talk all about it. But clearly, after Prey, audiences now have an appetite for Predator. In second place, Regretting You, a romantic drama with $220 million. In third place, Sarah's Oil. Black Phone 2 comes in fourth position, which Andy and I both found very disappointing, especially as we both love Black Phone. And in fifth place, We Get It as a Sky original, Nuremberg, with just under $1.5 million. And here in the UK, Dan Trachtenberg's Predator Badlands is doing what it's doing in the US, and it's continuing to beat expectations. The Coral is in second place, Regretting You in third, Begonia in fourth place, and in the fifth position, Die My Love. And sadly, in the number 6 position is Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, which is a wonderful film, but it's just not finding an audience. And in the news, Warner Brothers Discovery has been back in the news in the past couple of days, and it seems that Comcast has made it official that they're interested in making a bid for the company. Mark Wahlberg is reportedly attached to star and produce in an English language film adaptation of Joe Nesbo's novel Headhunters over at Apple Studios. Bill DeBecke is writing the screenplay. You'll know his work from The Accountant and Ozarks, for the new take, which does not yet have a director attached. The property was previously adapted by the Imitation Game director Morten Teideldum into the acclaimed 2011 Norwegian dark comedy thriller of the same name. And the story, that follows a corporate headhunter, Roger Brown, who maintains the illusion of wealth and status despite his diminishing income, doing so by secretly stealing valuable works of art to fund his lifestyle. We've already mentioned on the film file that Jalmari Hollander is helming the Rambo prequel, to star Noah Centineo in the title role, which serves as a prequel to the 5 Sylvester Stallone-led movies. While the previous films were all, well, pretty violent affairs, they have wildly differing tones. They began with the melancholic and haunting First Blood, slipped into high action, and then into, just daft dark dramas. But Hollander says the series is taking a different, more adventurous and yet lighter approach than the previous films, as it explores John Rambo's early years during the Vietnam War. And that's just what we need with Rambo, a Rambo comedy set in a war. Despite it not being that particularly good, Jurassic Park Rebirth earned $900 million worldwide at the box office and became one of the year's biggest movies. So let's get the team back together. It seems that Gareth Edwards is returning to direct the next Jurassic entry, while the film's main trio of stars, former Marvel star Scarlett Johansson, recently crowned Sexiest Man of the Year Jonathan Bailey, not Andy or I, which is very disappointing, and Oscar winner Mahershala Ali are expected to return as well. No word yet who will be writing the script, as the recent one was penned by David Cope, who wrote the first film, but does it matter? Just throw dinosaurs in it, some action, a little bit of plot, and you have now a Jurassic Park movie. If you're a follower of the podcast, then you know how excited Andy and I are for the upcoming remake of the 1980s action fantasy cult classic Highlander. Joining the cast of Henry Cavill, Russell Crowe, Marisa Abela and Dave Bautista, alongside Karen Gillan, Jeremy Irons, Ahimon Hussain, Max Zhang, Andrew McIntyre, we now have Siobhan Cullen, Jun Jong-seo, Nassim Yes, and Kevin Kidd. What we know about the plot is Cavill is playing Connor MacLeod, a medieval Scottish Highlander, who discovers he's an immortal warrior. And with the help of a swordsman named Ramirez, purportedly to be Crow, the Highlander battles other immortals across the centuries. Of all the newcomers, what we do know is that Cullen is playing a police psychiatrist who helped MacLeod. Yes, there can be only one. It's been on the rumour list for so many years, but it seems Warner Brothers is set to revive its Gremlins franchise. It was confirmed that not only is the project happening, but it already has a locked release date. Steven Spielberg is back on board as executive producer, and on board also is the original film's writer, Chris Columbus, who will produce and direct the film. Sadly, that means that you're not going to get the great Joe Dante returning. It was confirmed recently that Quentin Tarantino's combined Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair, was officially set to have a US nationwide release on December the 5th. And now, this week, we have a trailer for the re-release. So the film was originally conceived and filmed as a single feature, but was split into 2 installments during the editing process to accommodate an epic running time. The 2 parts were ultimately released 6 months apart and grossed more than $330 million worldwide between them. Now, the 127-minute The Whole Bloody Affair removes both the cliffhanger ending from the first film and the recap from the second, but does add a 15-minute intermission, an event which brings the pair of films together as a single, cohesive storyline. The film will also include a never-before-seen 7.5-minute animated sequence. The trailer's out, check it out. It's bloody in all the right places and makes me excited to revisit Kill Bill. For the next news item, I'm not certain how I feel about it. It seems that Ryan Reynolds is reportedly developing a remake of the 1974 action comedy, for want of a better term, of the classic Michael Cimino, Clint Eastwood film Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Eastwood starred as a bank robber disguised as a preacher on the run from his old gang that mistakenly believes he double-crossed them. Upon the way, he meets Lightfoot, played with so much charm by Jeff Bridges, a low-level street thief, and the two come up with a plan to team up with the old gang for a new bank job. It's a heist movie, so nothing goes quite as planned. The film marked the debut of Michael Cimino, who went on to win an Oscar for his work on 1978's Deer Hunter, and then delivered one of the most infamous 80s bombs of all time, Heaven's Gate. It seems that Reynolds is eyeing to star in the remake and will produce alongside his team at his Maximum Effort production label. I love Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. It's one of my favourite Clint Eastwood films, one of my favourite Jeff Bridges films, and I'm not sure what I think about it. I hope it's true to the original. It gets the right level of humour and violence about right, but should it be messed with? It is a classic. We'll wait and see. I have trust in Reynolds. 3-time Oscar winner Meryl Streep and Sigourney Weaver are set to share the screen for the first time in the upcoming New York set thriller Useful Idiots. Directed by Joseph Cedar from a screenplay by himself, Useful Idiots sounds like the kind of juicy thriller for its first-time co-stars to get their teeth into. Streep will star as a veteran journalist on the New York City luxury market property beat, who, while disillusioned, takes the imminent record-breaking sale of a luxury apartment as a prime opportunity to dig into its enigmatic buyer and their buildings. Before we leave the news, some sad passings. Oscar-nominated, Tony-winning actress Pauline Collins, best known for her iconic role in Shirley Valentine, has passed away at the age of 85. It's reported that Collins died peacefully at her home in London at the age of 85. An exact cause of death hasn't been mentioned, but Collins, as we know, had suffered from Parkinson's disease for a long time. Well known to British TV viewers for her work in many sitcoms, she gained global recognition for her role as Shirley Valentine, a neglected, middle-aged Liverpudlian housewife who has a holiday romance with a Greek tavern owner. She originally was on stage in the one-woman play in 1988 and then in the film adaptation in 1989 alongside Tom Conti. She had many TV and film credits, including City of Joy, Paradise Rose, and You Will Meet a Tall, Dark Stranger, as well as appearing in the original Doctor Who in 1967 and again in Doctor Who in 2006. She was an icon of the British stage and an icon of British television, and will be sadly missed. And Lee Tamahori, the Wellington-born filmmaker, best known for the acclaimed 1994 and rather brilliant New Zealand film Once Were Warriors, and the 2002 James Bond flop Die Another Day, has passed away at the age of 75 following a battle with Parkinson's disease. His other works include The Edge, Mulholland Falls, Along Came a Spider, and The Convert. After Bond, Tamahori went on to another putative blockbuster sequel, the XXX State of the Union, which starred Ice Cube, after the original star Vin Diesel dropped out, and then made the underrated Nick Cage sci-fi thriller Next. He was a talented and visual director who never really quite found his place in Hollywood, but his New Zealand work was outstanding, especially Once Were Warriors. Our condolences go out to his friends and his family. And that, folks, that's the news. You're listening to No Barriers Radio, and you're listening to The Film File, the film show for film geeks by film geeks. And if you're enjoying the show, then check out the Film File podcast, which you can find quite easily by heading over to your favourite podcast platform, searching for The Film File, hitting that subscription button, and leaving a like. More to come on No Barriers Radio, and more to come on The Film File. And you can get in touch with us right here at Film File HQ by simply
heading over to social media platforms, search for Film File UK. You can get in touch with us through there. You can email us, podcast@filmfile.uk. Get in touch with us with any thoughts on films, any films that you want us to deep dive at some point, any films that you disagree with our opinions on. Feel free. We're always open to listen to other sides of the story.
And now it's time for this week's deep dive.
Dive.
It's 30 years ago, and Pierce Brosnan stepped into classic role of 007 James Bond with GoldenEye.
When the world is the target
72 hours ago, a secret weapon system was detonated over Seven
and the threat is real,
GoldenEye exists. A radiation surge that destroys everything with an electronic circuit.
you can still depend on one man.
I want you to find GoldenEye.
3,
Find who took it.
2,
And stop it.
1.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
The world's most famous secret agent is back.
We aim to please.
And this time, 007 is facing the ultimate enemy. The man who knows him best.
Hello, James. What an unpleasant surprise.
006.
What's the matter? No pithy comeback?
He was your friend, and now he's your enemy, and you will kill him.
Is the satellite in range? Target is London.
Now, the entire world is about to be caught in the crossfire.
See you in hell, James. You first. Kill him.
The pleasure will be all mine.
Did you check her out? Head to toe.
3 clicks, arms the fuse. Don't say it.
The writing's on the wall?
Grow up, 007.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
No, James. I was always better.
Both of you, stop!
United Artists brings you, trust me, James Bond.
I wouldn't think of it. Just be
Cowboy and sophisticated.
That's one trick I've never learned.
GoldenEye, released in 1995, is the 17th in James Bond series. Effortlessly suave and sophisticated Pierce Brosnan making his debut as Agent 007 in arguably the first and the best of the Pierce Brosnan Bond films. GoldenEye brought the franchise into a much more modern context and is a fascinating deep dive into franchise reinvention, because this is a film about the Cold War transition and restaking the claim as a part of cinematic legacy. The plot: 9 years after a Soviet mission gone wrong, Bond faces a mysterious figure, Alex Trevelyan, played by Sean Bean, a former ally turned terrorist who plans to use a powerful secret defense system. Bond teams up with a computer programmer as he travels to Russia to locate the electromagnetic satellite weapon stolen by the former MI6 agent who Bond believed was dead. The plan is to cause a global financial meltdown. With the idea of reinvigorating James Bond after the Timothy Dalton years, then this film certainly succeeded. Because as of 1995, the Cold War was over. The USSR had collapsed, and Bond, who was a symbol of imperial confidence and Cold War stability, now risked irrelevance. So Bond had to be reinvented for the new world. Director Martin Campbell, who had come from the excellent BBC series The Edge of Darkness, was tasked with modernising Bond for the 90s, a world of new technology, shifting politics, and changing gender roles. The film's repositioning of Bond in a post-Soviet, post-ideological age where the threats are not nations but in fact rogue agents, corporations and technology. With a screenplay by Michael France with later revisions by Jeffrey Kane and Ruth Fierstein, this balances a certain sense of nostalgia with a redefining of the Bond series. Not only were there changes on screen, but there were changes behind the scenes. GoldenEye was the first James Bond film not produced by Albert R. Broccoli, following his stepping down from Eon Productions and the replacement by his daughter, Barbara Broccoli, along with Michael G. Wilson. Broccoli was still involved as a consultant producer, but it was his final film project before his death in 1996. And GoldenEye was the first James Bond film in the series not to use any story elements from the works of novelist Ian Fleming. GoldenEye was released after a 6-year hiatus in the series. The previous Bond film, License to Kill, which came out in 1989, underperformed. And Timothy Dalton, who, to be honest, I thought was a great Bond, his tenure ended amid legal battles that delayed production. The producers chose Pierce Brosnan, who, after Dalton had initially turned down the role, had been prevented from succeeding Roger Moore in 1986, but because of his contract to the television series Remington Steele, he had to turn it down. Before negotiating with Brosnan, Mel Gibson, Hugh Grant and Liam Neeson had passed on the role. Neeson had said that his then fiancée Natasha Richardson wouldn't marry him if he accepted the role. Paul McGann, who later went on to be a Doctor Who, auditioned for the role and was the studio's second choice if Brosnan had turned it down again. M was also recast, with actress Dame Judi Dench becoming the first woman to portray the character, replacing Robert Brown. The role of Miss Moneypenny was also recast, Caroline Bliss being replaced by Samantha Bond. However, good old Desmond Llewellyn was the only actor to reprise his previous role as Q. For the character of Alex Trevelyan, it was originally envisaged as an older character and as a mentor to Bond. Sir Anthony Hopkins and Alan Rickman were reportedly sought for the role, but both turned it down, and Sean Bean was subsequently cast, and the character was rewritten as Bond's peer. The character of Natalia Simonova, the Bond girl, was played by Isabella Scorupco, and rounding out the cast was Alan Cummings. After the almost turgid direction from John Glenn, Martin Campbell brings a kinetic, frenzied energy to the film. There's a sense of realism with practical stunts, visceral hand-to-hand combat, and really grounded action sequences. For instance, the damn bungee jump opening remains one of the most celebrated Bond stunts, and it was filmed practically. The film's pacing mirrors the franchise's reboot, with fast, confident, and occasionally over the top, but it's never frivolous. And the high point, of course, is the tank chase through St. Petersburg. Brosnan's synthesis of the wit of Moore and the grit of Dalton, and has that cool professionalism of Connery. His Bond is sleek. He's more self-aware, slightly more emotional, and the first truly modern 007. I would say that beneath the quips lies an undercurrent of loneliness and moral fatigue, and especially in his confrontation with Trevelyan. And this would be carried on into the Daniel Craig era, making Bond less of a superhuman, more of a man. GoldenEye succeeds on every level, except one, and that's the music. Yes, you do have a great theme song written by Bono and The Edge, performed by Tina Turner, which is powerful, and up there with other classic Bond tracks. But it's the soundtrack composed and performed by Eric Serra, who previously worked with Luc Besson on films like Leon, really lets the film down. As Richard von Busak in The Metro wrote, it was more appropriate for a ride on an elevator than a ride on a roller coaster. The score fails completely in its attempts to tie GoldenEye to the franchise's past. It misses the power of John Barry. So much so, Martin Campbell would also later express his disappointment with the score, citing budget constraints and a difficulty working with Serra, who, according to Campbell, would become uncooperative when asked to rescore the St. Petersburg tank chase scene. So it's no surprise that later Bond films returned to the orchestral scores. However, GoldenEye stands as an interesting, if not weak, soundtrack. So retrospectively, GoldenEye saved the Bond franchise, both critically and commercially. Its success revived MGM UA and ushered in the Brosnan era. It led to sequels, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day, all of which are okay, but not as strong as GoldenEye. Its legacy can be felt in later Bond films, especially Casino Royale, directed by Campbell. Skyfall echoes GoldenEye's exploration of legacy, loyalty, and post-war identity. You could also say this was the first feminist Bond, not because Bond changes radically, but because the film frames his worldview as anachronistic. GoldenEye gets the balance of traditional Bond glamour with a modern grit. Yes, it does have some tonal, uneven shifts, but this is sleek, knowing, and, like Brosnan's Bond itself, confident. GoldenEye is where James Bond stopped fighting the Soviets and started fighting himself. If you want to watch GoldenEye, you can find it on ITVX. It's on Amazon Prime, but I would certainly suggest you pick it up as a Blu-ray as part of the James Bond collection. And we'll be back next week with another deep dive. And with Andy being off, what I thought we'd do is we'd look back through the archives for a deep dive that covers the whole of the James Bond legacy. So let's go back in time to discuss our thoughts of the James Bond series right up to the release of No Time to Die.
Why would I betray you?
We all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet.
Where's 007?
I need a favor, brother. You're the only one I trust for this.
The world's moved on, Commander Bond.
You were 00?
2 years. So stay in your lane. You get in my way, I will put a bullet in your knee. The one that works.
I thought you two would get along.
Name? Bond. James Bond.
So you're not dead?
Hello, Q. I've missed you.
It's the most valuable asset this country has. If you feel yourself losing control,
I'm not going to lose control.
James, you gave up everything for her. When her secret finds its way out, it'll be the death of him.
What is it?
You don't.
License to kill.
as you know, at this point in the program, it is our deep dive, where we take a deep dive into a classic movie, an interesting choice, or a film that we just adore. And as you know, James Bond is back this week with No Time to Die. So rather than talk about just one James Bond and just one James Bond actor, let's talk about the whole darn series. Take it away, John Barry. So James Bond was created by novelist Ian Fleming in 1953. And as you know, a British secret agent working for MI6 under the codename 007. He's been portrayed by many actors, including Sean Connery, David Niven, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and now Daniel Craig, in 27 productions. All but 2 were made by Eon Films, who now hold the rights to all of Fleming's Bond novels. The film series started in 1961 with Dr. No, directed by Terence Young, and featured Connery as Bond. The series of films followed in 1962, and as I said, there have been 24 films with a combined gross of nearly $7 billion today, and it's the 6th highest grossing film series of all time. Andy, I know we've got a lot to get through. What was your first introduction to Bond? What was the first Bond film that you ever saw?
I couldn't put my finger on which would be the first of the Bond films, but I can tell you that as a child, holiday times, Easter, Christmas, any bank holidays, it was always going to be a Bond film on either BBC or ITV that I would tune into. And this is another one of those that I used to sit there when we got the Radio Times and look across on a bank holiday Monday and circle which film I wanted to watch. And it would have been one of the Roger Moore era, because the Roger Moore films got a lot of rotation on TV during my 7 to 9 to 10-year-old era. And I was drawn straight away to the ones that I can remember specifically watching on TV are Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun. They were the 2 that most commonly would pop up. Sean Connery ones would also get put into the rotation, but they didn't quite have that memorable hold on me as a young child. Basically, if BBC was showing Goldfinger and ITV was showing Live and Let Die, which occasionally happened on Boxing Day, that they both go head to head with a different Bond from a different era, I would be circling Live and Let Die, because as a child, I wanted to see more. I wanted to see more. And so that was my early introduction to Bond, was through TV. The first one that I saw on the cinema was Moonraker.
Okay.
Which, as a child, I absolutely adored Moonraker. And I know it doesn't stand up well over time, and neither does any of the Roger Moore era, to be honest with you. But I lapped that up as a child because it was Bond going into space, and it was tapping into that like whole sci-fi element of adventure that had started when Star Wars had come out. So that was my first cinema experience, Moonraker. But aside from that, it was always Boxing Day, Easter, Monday, any bank holidays, always got to be a Bond film on TV. And no matter how many times I'd seen them, I would always rewatch them.
I remember it. I'm not sure in which order this started, whether I saw Bond on TV first or I went to the cinema. So when ITV got the rights to the Bond film, and this is in the day when there were 3 channels, it was such a big deal. I mean, it was a revelation. And they started with, of course, Dr. No, and they showed them in chronological order. So I'm not sure whether I came into Bond, because I do remember seeing Dr. No on television, or I started with Diamonds Are Forever in the cinema. So that bit of chronology, I'm unsure about. But I did see Diamonds Are Forever first, and it was the last of, as we know, the Sean Connery movies until Never Say Never Again came up. And then the mantle got passed to Roger Moore for Live and Let Die. Now, Roger Moore was one of those actors that I'd kind of grown up with in the early 70s. So Roger Moore initially made much more of an impact on me. I knew him from The Saint, I knew him from various movies, and I knew him from The Persuaders. And so Roger Moore stepping into it suddenly made him my favourite Bond. It's when I got a bit older and reassessed and got to know more of the Connery Bonds that order changed. Live and Let Die was my first, and that was followed by Man with the Golden Gun. And I was in, and every time a Bond film came out, I would be there in the cinema to see it. Right up to Moonraker, because when Moonraker landed, I was done with Bond. I hated where they'd taken Bond from this suave super spy. Spy Who Loved Me pushed the envelope as much as it could, and then by the time it got to Moonraker, they'd not just pushed the envelope; they'd stepped over the envelope, burnt the envelope, and gone in a direction. Because I hate camp, and I hated what Bond had become, and I was getting a bit older as well, so I'm sure it was there, but I think Moonraker over pushed it, and it became a spoof of what it was. The play on Close Encounters, the play on the sci-fi thing, and Bond was following trends rather than setting trends as it had done in the 60s, and I was out, and I didn't see another Bond film at the cinema until Timothy Dalton, Living Daylights, and then I was back in again. So I've had a relationship with James Bond through the movies my entire life. I had got reading the novels, but they were so severely dated.
Yeah.
Even reading them as in a much younger age, that I just couldn't connect with them at all, and desperately tried and had to go at a couple of them. I remember trying to read Thunderball, and while they are much more gritty, I just didn't connect to them because the language is so. It is so much of its time, but I'll always be with Bond, and it's played a massive influence in my cinema going, because for a long time they were the herald of British cinema, because ultimately they were British films.
I'm the same as you. That when I was young, like I said, Roger Moore, I loved everything that he did. But as I got older, as I got into my early teens and started to watch the Connery films a lot more, I started to appreciate that version of Bond a lot more. And I kind of fell out of love with Moore's one. Whilst they were running, I mean, I saw Moonraker onwards all at the cinema. I saw Octopussy at the cinema. Oh, why did I do that? But I remember when A View to a Kill came out, and I was all over that like a rash. And I know it's not a good film, but yeah, there was a poster collection that you could get from collecting cutouts from the back of crisp packets, and I got all 4 posters. Mainly because I went skip diving outside the leisure centre to get all the empty crisp packets to send off to get me free posters.
You have to do these things.
I was obsessed with it, and at the time I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I was getting more and more aware that what Connery brought to the role was something a lot edgier and a bit rough around the edges, and that's what Bond was to me. Like yourself, I delved into the books, and I've got some love for the books, but yes, they are a hard read. They are very of their time. But in that, I saw what Bond should be, which is that edgier. It is that hard-edged Bond. It's not the Roger Moore knowing wink at camera and quote an innuendo and give a bad pun. And so once Timothy Dalton came around, I lapped up what Dalton did. I loved that they went back to like a Connery-esque kind of approach and tried to make it grittier, tried to make it more serious, still had some gadgets, but they offloaded so many of them, got rid of the ridiculous nature. And for those 2 films, Bond was great again.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't the best Bond films, but I think Timothy Dalton definitely brought back that hard edge, which had really been missing, and where Moore had become far too old for the role by the time he got to make View to a Kill, and it was starting to show, and they couldn't shoot around it. Moore should have packed it in after Moonraker, because For Your Eyes Only, it was a kind of a return to what we liked about Bond. Octopussy I never saw. View to a Kill, I've only seen on television, but I didn't buy it. The only thing I enjoyed about that was the music. But yeah, Timothy Dalton brought that back. And then when we got Pierce Brosnan, and I think Timothy Dalton was hard done by, I think he should have had at least another film.
The biggest problem with Dalton is that he was bringing a rougher-edged Bond back, at a time when cinema goers wanted action films with jokes. They wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "Stick around, get to the chopper." They wanted the ridiculous action. They didn't want a gritty Bond.
Yeah, it kind of fell in that two spaces, didn't it? Because when Dalton suggested that he wouldn't be coming back, or it was made apparent that Dalton wouldn't come back, it looked like at one point that Mel Gibson was going to get the role.
Yeah.
And they wanted to take it almost down a Lethal Weapon style of filmmaking, all to do with rights and the studio, which studio bought Bond. But at one point, Mel Gibson was hotly tipped to take over Bond, and I'm sure he would have done a good job, because back then, the Mel Gibson that we know of today didn't have the baggage. He'd come straight off Lethal Weapon, was a huge international star, and before Lethal Weapon had been pretty much a dramatic actor rather than action hero. So it would have been interesting if they played it with a British accent. But that brought us to Pierce Brosnan. And Pierce Brosnan had been up for the part much earlier. In fact, he looked initially to take over from Roger Moore, but his work on Remington Steele, the TV series he was in at the time, contractually meant that he couldn't play Bond. But he eventually got the role. As he got a little bit older and lost some of the more younger looking aspect, if you get what I mean. He was a little bit too pretty while he was in Remington Steele, but by the time he got to play Bond in GoldenEye back in 1995, those rough edges were clearly on display, and it brought a maturity to Bond. So it was an interesting era. It was brought back by Martin Campbell, who would then later bring back Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. But it was a patchy era. I have a lot of time for GoldenEye, great Bond film. Tomorrow Never Dies. The World Is Not Enough is okay. Die Another Day, by the time we get to that, was a complete joke and killed the career of director Lee Tamahori altogether, because it was a mishmash of Bond ideas and almost went back to being a Roger Moore film.
I've just done a rewatch of all of the Brosnan era, because I started a rewatch of my whole box set of Bond when No Time to Die was due out last year, and then it got moved. And so I stopped my rewatch after I'd watched a few Connery films, and then I started watching it again towards the back end of last year when No Time to Die was due to get released. And then it got moved. So I stopped my rewatch once I got like a part way into the Roger Moore. And so I've started it over the past month to continue the rewatch. And I've now got all the way through the Brosnan era. And I remember liking GoldenEye when it came out. And I remember liking it when I watched it on home release. Yeah, the recent revisit has made me look at it kind of not as good as it was. And I think it's because I've watched the Dalton 2 films back to back and then went straight on to GoldenEye, and I can see that all that Pierce Brosnan did, he didn't bring anything new to the role. He's cosplaying Roger Moore, and that's all that he brought to it. He just went back to the girls, the gadgets, and the innuendos. And there's literally every third line of dialogue is a bad pun. And it'd be like if I wrote a bad dad jokes book version of Bond. That's what the Brosnan era in total turned out to be. It got weaker and weaker as the films went on. And I think one of the biggest problems it had is around the same time as GoldenEye came out, Mike Myers brought us Austin Powers and pointed fun at all the nonsense that Bond was still trying to do. And it made Bond look dated for its time, because Austin Powers was doing it better and funnier.
Well, I mean, interestingly, GoldenEye was the opportunity to wipe the slate clean, and it did so really, really well. I think Martin Campbell brought a new edge to Bond, really updated it. We got Judi Dench as M in that one. We finally got a new Moneypenny. It just started to fall apart by the time we got to World Is Not Enough. I've got a soft spot for Tomorrow Never Dies. I thought that was a good, strong Bond film. But as we go through until we get to Die Another Day, they were so weakened, and as you said, they were a throwback to Roger Moore when the world had moved on, and to some extent Casino Royale, and many people criticised the film for it. saw what was happening within the genre, because at that point
Yeah.
we'd got the Jason Bourne films.
Yeah, Bourne
And
was seeking identities, missions were being impossible everywhere, and Bond looked too dated. So it needed that reinvigoration for the Bond franchise to make it darker, make it grittier.
So along comes Martin Campbell again to reintroduce Bond with a new Bond, and we got Daniel Craig. Now, for me, Daniel Craig is the epitome of Bond. I think it's added a dimension to Bond because in that very first film, they talk about him being a blunt instrument. You know, they do the Bond Begins at the same time that Batman Begins came out, and they started it. They started again at the beginning of his career, and they've had an arc. And for the first time ever, they weren't standalone films. For the first time ever, they had themes that ran through the series, and they had elements that they were sequels upon sequels upon sequels, the same way that the Jason Bourne films were. And I think that's added something into Bond. It's added that sense of continuity. So the aspect of now Daniel Craig moving on is even more intriguing rather than just replacing with another actor. They've taken an entire chapter of that character's life from starting in the missions to walking away at the end of Spectre from his job as 007, which it feels like No Time to Die is what they're playing on, which comes back to the Quentin Tarantino theory that 007 and James Bond is an identity that you pick.
I've always subscribed to that theory. I've always said this, and I know some people have turned around and said that when Skyfall came out, that disproved that theory because he was James Bond born into the family of Bond. But I explain that by saying there was an original James Bond, and that was this James Bond's father. The original James Bond, played by Sean Connery, passed away, and the identity was used for following agents. Whoever got the 007 license always got the James Bond name. Why did M want to recruit this James Bond? Because she had an attachment to the original James Bond because she worked alongside him. And so she was always protective and mother-like towards Daniel Craig's Bond. She recruited him into the agency to follow in his father's footsteps so the James Bond legacy could come back to the family.
Well, that
That's how I
nearly
like to look at
came
it.
true, Andy, in Skyfall, because the Albert Finney character was originally going to
Supposed to be Connery.
Sean Connery. But
Yeah.
he either turned it down because he was ill at the time, so I don't know whether he turned it down to illness or just didn't want to revisit the character as he'd retired.
Who would you pick for the next Bond? Who would be your
Wow.
first pick choice?
I'm going to go with two interesting choices. Now, one would be Jamie Bell. I think Jamie Bell, now in his mid-30s, has got enough chops on him to be able to bring something very likable to him. I know it's always easy to think about it. I know you remember him as Billy Elliot, and I know he's come a long way from that. So I think Jamie Bell's got some chops. But my absolutely perfect choice is Aidan Turner.
Oh, you stole mine.
Did I? Oh, right. Oh, brilliant. Well, we can agree on something because he grew up through Being Human. He's got the smouldering good looks. He's got the charm. He's got the personality. Proved that he can do a British accent with Paul Dark. He was in a couple of Christmases ago. The BBC had been doing a seasonal Agatha Christie adaptation, and he was in Then There Were None. And he played, I think it was either somebody who'd been in the Secret Service or was a big game hunter, but he had the right element of charm and he had the right element of danger. And he proved that in Being Human. I think he would be an absolutely spot on Bond and would bring something very, very different to it. Slightly younger, but that means that you can stick around for some time and grow. Because if you're going to be in Bond for 4 years, then it's 10 years out of your life.
Yeah,
and I think that would work wonderfully. So yeah, he would be my choice.
Yeah, I mean, he's top of my list because I've followed his career since like I first saw him in Being Human, and he's always stood out. But he's one of those people always pick the big names. They go, "Oh, I want Idris Elba to be Bond. Oh, and they go for like people who are already huge names. But Bond is always cast best when it's casting someone who's known but not huge, because the character of Bond should be what sells it, not who's playing the role. And Aidan Turner fits that bill perfectly because he's a solid actor who can bring such presence to it, but he's not universally known.
If you'd have asked me a couple of years ago, then I would have said Michael Fassbender, but I think he's too old for it now.
Yeah. Excellent choices.
And now it's time for this week's reviews.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
I'm going to kick off with a film that has now landed on Netflix, but I saw it in the cinema, which, to be perfectly honest, is the best place to see the latest film from Guillermo del Toro, Frankenstein.
I had determined that the memory of my evils should die with me. Some of what I will tell you is fact. Some is not. But it is all true. What manner of creature is that? What manner of devil made him? I did. I had a vision. An idea took shape in my mind. Inevitable. Unavoidable. Until it became truth. In seeking life, I created death.
Well, from the moment you settle into the latest retelling of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, Del Toro delivers what fans of his work have come to expect. And that is a sumptuous visual feast, a gothic sensibility and a deep human core beneath, and as we know, Del Toro loves his monsters, and in this case it's no exception, that beneath the monster is an achingly gorgeous film that allows his monster a loving sensibility and also capturing Del Toro's signature style. What works brilliantly is, of course, that visual style. The design is truly jaw-dropping, from the candlelit labs to frost-bound landscapes to the haunted interiors. The film looks like a Victorian illustration. No, what it looks like is the Bernie Wrightson illustrations of the illustrated Frankenstein graphic novel from over 30 years ago. The performances shine, particularly Jacob Elordi as the creature. A stirring blend of tormented, elegant, and the savage. Oscar Isaac as Victor Frankenstein is brooding, charismatic, and ultimately monstrous. In fact, he is the monster. It's an over-the-top operatic interpretation of the character, but no more over the top than Kenneth Branagh's. Del Toro has thematic ambition. This is the film that he has always wanted to make, and he focuses on creator and creation, the cycle of rejection, the notion of what it means to be human. And this is what resonates throughout the film. This film respects its gothic roots rather than just turning the monster into a horror ride of cheap scares. It's subtle, it's melancholic, and ultimately it's tragic. While I loved it, at nearly 2.5 hours, the runtime feels indulgent. The first act drags with the setup and the exposition, and while many sequences dazzle, others, particularly a few of the CGI moments, don't entirely live up to the craft around them, pulling you out of the immersive experience. But for fans of the original novel's pacing, or even more so the philosophical weight, the film may feel slightly different from what they expect. It's still faithful in essence, but it's adaptive in its execution. But if you're expecting a straightforward horror film, then you'll be surprised, or you may be disappointed. Del Toro gives us a dark, richly textured, emotional drama wrapped up in gothic splendor. We know he can do it because he did it with Crimson Peak. For much of its duration, the film sings its beauty matched with sorrow, its monsters deeply human, yet its tragedy palpable. It occasionally staggers under the weight of its own ambition, and some of the technical elements aren't flawless, but to my mind, those are worth forgiving in light of how much it does achieve. This project feels personal to Del Toro. This was the film he always wanted to make. And it's that commitment that carries it forward. For fans of Gothic cinema, monster mythology with a soul, this director is unafraid to embrace grandeur. And this is a film to savour. I'd strongly recommend seeing it in the theatre for its scale and its design, which is going to be neutered on the home screen. But then you can always revisit it for its details and the layers connected to the storytelling. This is a compelling, emotionally rich, visual lavish interpretation of the classic Mary Shelley story. And this is one of Del Toro's finer achievements. And the same, as we said about Nosferatu, with just enough bumps to make it interesting rather than perfection. And after the limited run at the cinema, you can now find it on Netflix. Okay, what is coming up over the next week? Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson star in the book-to-screen adaptation of a psychological comedy drama, Die My Love, brought to us by the incredible Lynn Ramsey. After, well, quite a long hiatus, we have the return of Now You See Me, Now You Don't. The magicians are back for another installment of Trick or Heist as they attempt to steal the world's largest queen diamond. In order to do so, the four horsemen must recruit 3 new skilled illusionists. Is it any good? Well, word of mouth hasn't been great. And a film that we at the Film File are looking forward to is The Running Man. Yes, it's Edgar Wright's adaptation of the Stephen King story. It's time for the games to begin as Glenn Powell stars in a reboot of the late 80s movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Powell is Ben Richards, a man down on his luck and looking to make a quick buck. He enters the Running Man game, a TV show in which participants must evade capture and death for 30 days. And that, folks, that's us done, more or less, for this week. But before we go, let me tell you about my neat thing. I was very excited when Netflix announced and produced the Sandman series based upon the legendary series by Neil Gaiman. Series 1 came and went and was everything I hoped it would be. Series 2 comes along. We now have a very different point of view of its creator, Neil Gaiman. The series was okay. It didn't live up to expectation. It adapted the series perfectly, but it lacked heart. All except the last episode, Death and the High Cost of Living. Starring the wonderful Kirby Howell-Baptiste as Death, it's the story of a journalist overwhelmed by hopelessness and has a life-altering 24 hours after crossing paths with Death, who is on her day off, which she gets every 100 years. It's quiet, it's honest, and it's a deeply human, and it isn't what you would expect. Death is sharp, strangely comforting, and this episode doesn't try to impress with spectacle in the way that the series has. It just sits with you. Reminds you that being alive, really alive, it means something. I think it's a really haunting and nostalgic story and a great coda for a very patchy second season and a timely meditation on finding meaning in a world that often feels, well, meaningless. And with that, that's me done. We'll be back, same bat channel, same bat time next week. Subscribe to the show, keep on listening, but before we go, what, no small talk, no chit-chat? That's the trouble with the world today. No one takes the time to really do sinister interrogation anymore. It's a lost art.